What's up, you guys? This is Devin with Century Effects Studios, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about autofocus points. But before we get into that nerd stuff, let's get into the fact that we just passed 1K. Well, got 1K, and it might fluctuate from there, but I'm just going to say we got 1K just to say it, because I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate everybody who tunes in, subscribes, likes, and comments. And speaking of comments, let's get right into this comment about autofocus points. Let's get right into the video, guys. So today we're going to be talking about autofocus points, and it's specifically about a comment that a subscriber or a commenter put in my comment box. I think it was about my T8i video, and essentially it was talking about 65 autofocus points being more and greater than 45 autofocus points. And in the video, I was essentially bashing the autofocus point system that is rehashed by Canon every year, and this, that, and the other, and how DSLRs actually focus. Well, this commenter was trying to make me seem as though I was wrong, just because the numbers seem to equate to 65 being more than 45. All right. The first thing you need to understand is theoretical versus reality. In theory, more autofocus points should help you, but if you're sitting on a sideline at a game and you got, let's say, 1 million autofocus points, I'm just going to exaggerate, how are you going to activate all those autofocus points if you have a DSLR? Because we were talking about a DSLR. We're not talking about mirrorless. Let's go to DSLR technology. If you got a DSLR and you're sitting there with 20 more autofocus points than you did before because you're going from 45 to 65, how are you going to activate all those focus points? Are you going to use a zone? Are you going to use a selective spot? Are you going to get a tracking mode? Because autofocus is not on DSLRs, unless you're using the 1DX Mark III, I believe. And I think that's just face tracking autofocus. And maybe some of the other cameras have face tracking autofocus, but that's in live view. That's not actually going through the actual eyepiece optical viewfinder, because you can't utilize that because the mirror separates the live view from the optical viewfinder. And most people who are actually sitting there shooting sports, it's not shooting from the live view menu. So you can't use face tracking autofocus. You're confined to using autofocus points, whether it's 65, whether it's 100, whether it's 1 million autofocus points through that little optical viewfinder. Those 1 million or 65 autofocus points can only be confined to the center of the actual DSLR. Now, the 1DX and the newer cameras, 1DX Mark III, 1DX Mark II, they've tried to spread those focus points all the way out to the edges as much as possible, but for whatever reason, DSLRs have never been able to actually utilize the entire frame to focus. So what does that mean for you as a camera, a pro, or a user of that camera? You're confined to using or utilizing the modes, whether it be AI servo, whether it be auto intelligent, whether it be one shot, whether it be 65 autofocus points enacted, relying on the camera's autofocusing system to actually get those autofocusing points at the right spot at the right time. Because you can't use the joystick, especially if you have 65 autofocus points, to jet that little cursor around the edge of the screen to where that football player might be, or even doing portraits. You can't do that. It's not practical. You have to, well, you can probably do it for portraits, but for sports, it's definitely not practical. Wildlife is definitely not practical. So you are forced to rely on some kind of face tracking autofocus. Like the ADD I'm using right now is using for video for my face tracking autofocus, but that's in live view. Like I said before, you can't use live view effectively for sports, especially not on the DSLR. You know, you're moving, you're looking at the back of the screen, you can't really get a feel for what a shot is. You know, especially when you can't control the action. So then more autofocus points would be worse. Even though in theory you get more autofocus points, you are still responsible for where those autofocus points go. Cameras are not perfect. They can't perfectly get the autofocus point to where you want them to be. Even the newer mirrorless cameras that do face tracking and animal tracking eye focus, there's still a margin of error. Maybe you're working for a company that's going to pay you thousands of dollars for your Olympic photography. You can't really afford a lot of missing shots based off of the camera and what the camera thinks that is the, you know, the best autofocus point for that particular picture at the time. And then you're shooting at 12 frames, 14 frames, 16 frames a second. You have a lot to worry about. Do you even know if the camera is actually utilizing those autofocus points? It's a DSLR, so there's going to be a blackout time. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons why more autofocus points and more to worry about while you're shooting is actually a hindrance. And even though it's supposed to be a benefit to you, it's actually working against you. You also have to understand that what's advertised is not actually what you get sometimes. You might be saying, what? You mean the 65 autofocus points that they said I'm going to get, I'm not actually utilizing them all? What? They're all there, Devin. They're in the middle of the camera. I can see them. Yeah, you can see them, but click on a autofocus point that's all the way at the edge of the screen versus the one in the middle. Some focus points actually activate easier or at all. Some of them don't even activate at all if you push your autofocus points all the way to the edge of the screen, depending on what camera you have. You literally have to have Canon's $6,000 retail camera, the 1DX Mark II, 3, whatever they have at the top of the line right now, to actually have the best chance of having your autofocus points activate on the edges. And then if you want to do a creative crop with the rule of thirds or whatever, you know, composition you want to do, you understand that I can't focus reliably with that. And then you get a full frame camera. Why? Because of the low light and the bokeh, the background blur, and you figure out that focus is extremely critical, and then you start shooting at 1.8, 2.8, 2.0, and then you got all 65 of these autofocus points to worry about, and then come to find out sometimes not all the 65 autofocus points have the same capability, and then the ones in the middle are like super cross type and need more contrast, or don't need as much contrast as the ones on the outside, or the outside ones do need more contrast. And don't get me started in shooting in light situations that are low, like you can't use flash, you can't have any other extraneous light because that would disturb a performer. So when you give me this lackluster argument that 65 autofocus points is better than 45, come on, you really haven't used the camera, well, at least as a professional, or I have used the camera. When you're going from sports to wildlife to even portraits, where you have these f2.8, 2.0, 1.8, 1.4 lenses, and you sit there like, oh, I got 65 autofocus points, but they're all crammed in the center and you can't do much with it. Then you got to focus and recompose and then risk losing focus, and then somebody on YouTube is going to come up here and comment on your video, and then you give you all this constructive criticism on Facebook forums and YouTube and Instagram comment sections and forums, talking about your picture is not as good as it could be because it's out of focus or it's not composed well because your camera wasn't able to give you what you wanted, even though you upgraded to a 65 autofocus point system. What's advertised is not what you actually get in real life. The next point will be, what photography do you do? Do you do just standing still landscape photography? Because it's kind of hard to miss focus on a landscape image unless you're in like an uneven type of playing field, or you're shooting at a slow shutter speed, which a lot of times you are as a landscape photographer, or you're sitting on a tripod and something happens and it bumps and stuff like that. But less than shooting a picture of a person, you have less of a chance to lose your autofocus. But if you're shooting wildlife where you can't control the situation, action, sports, weddings, where you can't control the subtle movement of a person, and you need to be able to rely on your autofocus point, that's why that back joystick is so useful for most people. You're going to need all the help you can get, especially when you get more and more and more autofocus points. I don't even know. I think the 1DX has over 100 autofocus points. The 1DX Mark III, the most recent one, even though it focuses well, you would need the live view. The last point I want to hit is you have to understand where this my gripe with the 45 autofocus point system comes from. Canon has had the 45 autofocus point system for so long. Does anybody know what the original 1D was? Or the 1D Mark II? Not the X, the 1D. There's a 1D, there's a 1D Mark II, there's a 1D Mark III. I think there's also a 1D Mark IV. There's a 1DS. There's a 1DS Mark II. There's a 1DS Mark III. These are all separate cameras, but a lot of them have that same 45 autofocus point system. And you might be saying here, well, why would they come out with the exact same autofocus point system for each camera? Because they're subtly different. There's a subtle difference with every iteration. And even though it's not a big difference, it's a difference nonetheless, because you can still have an upgrade with the same autofocus point system. So just because you come out with the newest, latest, and greatest 65 autofocus point system, you have to understand that technology has to be broken. Like, technology still is not perfect. Just because you come out with a keyless ignition start doesn't mean it's better than the regular key start when it comes to keeping up with the keys and making sure you have a safe transition from cutting on your car. I'm Devin with CFXTV Studios, guys, and thank you guys for watching this video. Thanks for the 1,000 subscribers.